May I ask Paul Weston to grab a mic and join this conversation? Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, thank you very much, Frank. I was watching Fox News this morning, and this is slightly off topic, but bear with me. And it was about the IRS, and this woman phoned in wanting to know what she should do with her $2,500 rebate. Should she go to Europe, or should she pay off some debt? And this is a question she asked, and this expert woman on Fox News advised her that what she should do is pay off her debt, save some money, take the whole family to Europe, because she said Europe will always be there. And therein is the problem. Europe is not always going to be there, I'm afraid. And it's very hard following Lars here, because he's explained the problems in Denmark and Europe as a whole. But I came here a couple of years ago, and I was talking about the illusion of permanence, which was something that was flagged up in Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilizations. And this idea that tomorrow is going to be the same as today, and next week is going to be the same as this week, and next year will be the same as this year. And that's pretty much true. But then when you start looking in terms of decades, everything changes. And 2025 in Europe will be very different to 2015. And 2035 will be different to 2025 ad infinitum. And this is purely down to demographics. You know, the English have taken on board the preaching of the feminist groups, and we no longer have enough children. And we're now down to 1.5 child per couple, which means tomorrow's generation is 25% smaller than today's generation. But the Islamic immigrants coming in are averaging 4 children per couple. And that's not just per couple, because they also have 4 wives. Not all of them, but some of them. So some of them are having 16 children per one man. And if you project these figures forward, you suddenly start realizing that the normal demographic growth of a country is changing entirely. And furthermore, when the average English woman, if she can be bothered to have a child at all, is in her mid-30s or early 40s, these Muslim women are having children aged 16 to 21. So their generation is much faster than our generation. And when you look back to for example, the 1970s, we had something like 200,000 Muslims in Britain at that time. But every decade they've doubled since then. So the 200,000 became 400,000, became 800,000. We're now up to 3.2 million. And they are all young. You know, not all of them are young, obviously, but their demographic, most of them are under the age of 15, which is the future breeding age, to put it bluntly, and the future fighting age. But when 200,000 become 400,000 in a country, I'm in America now, so I can't say a country as big as England, but as little as England is, it is big for 200,000 or even 400,000. But when the 3.2 million today become 6.4 million tomorrow, it is completely different to the 1970s doubling of a couple of 100,000. And then we are really going to start to notice the rise, not just in demographics, but as they grow, they start demanding more and they start pushing more. And because they back this up with terrorism and with jihad, the government listens to them. You know, when Muhammad said, "I have been made victorious through terror," he's speaking absolutely the truth. And our government understands the fact that they are frightened of Islam, and Islam pushes and our government buckles. There is a reason why Islam translated means submission. They know exactly what they're doing. They push, we submit. And that's what's happening in Britain, and of course with Lars in Denmark, and all across Europe. And you particularly, I came here really today to make the point that do not let what has happened in Europe and in Britain happen to America. But we in England look to Sweden in the way that America should be looking to Britain, because Sweden is literally a lost country. You know, we in Britain have maybe 2 decades before everything really hits the wall. In Sweden, we're looking at 5 years to 10 years, and Sweden has terrible, enormous problems. Malmö is now the rape capital of the European continent. Aside from South Africa, I think it's the rape capital of the world. It is that bad. So we look to Sweden in the way that you need to look to us. And we had, over the last 12 months, 12 mass transit bombings planned for England that our intelligence services, MI5, MI6, managed to stop. That's one a month where they're looking to kill hundreds and maim thousands of people. And despite this, we still say, you can keep on coming into our country. You know, when Donald Trump talked about, and of course it was misreported in England that Trump had said, we don't want any more Muslims. What Trump said, of course, we don't want any more Muslims over 5 years until we know exactly who they are. And with us, we have no idea. We have no idea who these people are. But we are still letting them come in, knowing full well. Europol, I don't know if you've heard of Europol, this is the rather sinister European police force who can cross borders and arrest people and take them out of England and back to Brussels or some sort of other similar Lubyanka sort of place. Europol has said that there will be 5,000 jihadists amongst the hundreds of thousands of millions now, millions of supposed Syrian migrants coming into Europe. That's 5,000 jihadis. And we still cannot say no more, even despite that. So I have been saying for a long time that when the inevitable attack happens, as it happened in Paris last year, 2 of those people in Paris were migrants. When it happens, British politicians, Danish politicians, European politicians of every description will have the blood of the murdered and the blood of the maimed on their hands. And the problem we have is not just letting them in. You know, when we had our own version of, much smaller, but when we had our 2005 mass transit bombings in London, the police commissioner, Sir Ian Blair, said afterwards that Islam and terrorism are 2 words that do not go together. The assistant police commissioner said exactly the same thing. Tony Blair said exactly the same thing. We had, a couple of years ago, Fusilier Lee Rigby, a serving British soldier, murdered in the streets of London, run down by a car, and while he was still alive, they tried to decapitate him. Again, David Cameron, a supposedly conservative prime minister, came out and said that Islam has nothing to do with this, and this is a perversion of Islam. These guys were standing there with blood on their hands, waving the Quran, saying, we have been ordered by Allah to do this. And despite this, Cameron says, it has nothing to do with Islam. And this total denial, this complete denial, and it's not just Cameron, it is all across Europe, this denial of what Islam is going to be the downfall of Europe. Because by the time the politicians have finally got the balls to stand up and tell the truth, it may be too late at that time from demographic reasons to actually do anything about it. And because I'm English, I'm going to have to talk to you very briefly before I wrap up about what happened with the raping and grooming gangs that we have had for the last 20 years in Great Britain, but only finally made the news last year and it was broken by a guy called Andrew Norfolk, who was a Times journalist. And the reason he knew about it, the police knew about it, the politicians knew about it, but none of them wanted to talk about it because that would cause some sort of community uncohesion and community tensions. Now, I think it is much more likely that you will get community tensions when your local girls and sisters and daughters are being raped and groomed and tortured, and the police won't talk about it. I think that is much more conducive to community tension than actually telling the truth about it when it could have been stopped way back in 1990. And I don't know what you know about the British National Party and Nick Griffin, but Nick Griffin, who has some sins that I can't forgive him for, but Nick Griffin came out and actually said many years ago, I think in 2004, 2005, he told the truth about these Muslim grooming gangs. And the response to the British government was not to investigate and not to look out for these girls. All of these girls, by the way, were in care. They were vulnerable young girls, and they're not 16 and 18. These girls went from 7 to 13 years of age. And as I'm talking about it now, the police would be called to a hotel where 13 Muslim men were in a room with a naked 12-year-old girl under the table and a very irate father outside the front of the hotel, and the police would arrest the father. This is how bad it is. And I've rather gone off track, but the Muslim grooming thing, I think, is really the icing on the cake in terms of what they are allowed to get away with and what our reaction is politically from the politicians and from the police, the media, because they all colluded in covering it up. I was talking about Nick Griffin, and the Times journalist, when he broke the story in 2014, said the reason they had sat on this story for so many years was because they did not want to give any ammunition to the nasty fascist right-wing political organizations in Britain, which is absolutely disgusting. And I'm rambling on, but my point really is Britain is not yet lost. We're not far off being lost. Sweden's gone. Sweden is just a matter of 5 or 10 years. Britain can still maybe do something about this. But I don't think it will be resolved peacefully. I think probably we are going to be looking at a civil war scenario in the same way that Yugoslavia broke up in the 1990s and the civil war in Lebanon in the 1970s. I think this is the future of Europe, generally speaking, and I think when it happens, it will not be contained in the way that Yugoslavia was able to be contained. It's going to be cataclysmic, something that people cannot imagine really in living in modern democratic times, but it's coming. And I will finish simply by saying you all need to look at what's happening in Britain and Sweden and Europe, and you all need to make sure that you retain, because I know Obama is trying to clamp down on this, you retain your First Amendment rights, because unless we can talk about this, unless we can bring it out in the open, you in America will go the same way. You need to stand up and look at what we're doing and say this is never going to happen here. Thank you.